What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and I'm here today. There's a few things to talk about. Obviously, today is cut down day, so the Dolphins and every team in the league had to trim their rosters from 85 down to 80. We have now gone through 2 cut downs, there was also practice today, although it wasn't a full practice. They just had a walkthrough, although there are a few notes, and some important notes, actually, that I'm going to talk to you about. There was also a press conference done, Brian Flores, before the walkthrough, so we're going to go through some of that. Before that, though, I actually do want to start off with an Alan Pupar article, and I'm just going to read the first part of this about Tua and his performance, in the Falcons game or whatever. The rest of it doesn't really matter. It's, as you can see, the title here, really made strides in Atlanta. Was Xavier Howard ranked too low? They're talking about his top 100 rank. He was ranked number 17 in the top 100. So according to his peers, right, the players in the NFL, they believe he is the 17th best player in the NFL. I mean, I think that's a solid spot. And obviously he definitely is, in my opinion, the best corner. I actually tweeted out the little mashup and the little segment they did on Xavier Howard for the top 100, because it was really great. And last year, unquestionably, he was the best. He had 10 interceptions, which led the league, 20 passes defensed, which led the league. He had a super low, it was like 50-something, low 50s in passer rating. I mean, the dude's a monster, and that's all there is to it. So anyway, let's get through this first part, though, because I do want to get on to the practice stuff. But let's see. But there is some important stuff about this that I do want to talk about. After not getting the chance to play in a preseason game as a rookie, Tua Tagovailoa clearly has taken advantage of his opportunities so far this summer against the Chicago Bears and Atlanta Falcons. Miami Dolphins quarterback's performances have been really encouraging in terms of what it could mean for the 2021 regular season. In fact, Tagovailoa has been busy checking off boxes of what any Dolphins fans would want to see at this time, though we also have to caution that nothing will present a test like the regular season. And so before I continue on, that's why when I tell you guys, I don't get my emotions invested into it. I don't get emotionally invested until the regular season. That's what I'm talking about, right? Because that's when it's live bullets, like for real live bullets, right? When it actually means something, when it goes down on your record, when then, you have stats that go into the record books, into the history books that we can then evaluate. We have tape to evaluate, right? So of actual performances, when it's your full team out there, when you're down to the 53 man and it's all your starters and you're actually trying to win games, no more vanilla playbooks, etc., right? That's down the line, though, and up to this point, everything we've seen from Tua in the preseason should offer great optimism. He indeed could be in line for a big jump in his second season. And just real quick, as I've said a million times, for me, it's never been about the person or the player. It's always been about the situation around him. That was my biggest concern for him and his success and the success of the team. But obviously that does mean, but obviously for the team to be successful, he obviously does have to progress as well, right? He can't be stagnant. He has to progress, and he has things to work on, and he definitely has to improve from last year. But, of course, added context to that is now he's fully healthy, and that's going to be a major difference. What it comes down to is the rest of the team, and are they going to play up? Now, as I told you guys, they really impressed me in this Falcons game. However, and I've gone back and I've watched it numerous times. Look, a lot of Dolphins fans want to be quick to point out that in the Chicago game, the offensive line struggled mightily because of that, really imposing Chicago front. And while that is at least to some degree true, and it is a large factor in why that was the case, it's also fair to point out that the Falcons had almost none of their starters play that night, right? They had, I think, 2 cornerbacks and their right tackle were the only starters that they had out. So 19 of their 22 starters didn't play. And from the reports that I had seen, in fact, this is one of them, I think he mentions it here, they had 24 players that they held out in total. The Falcons did. So, look, it is context, important context, to say that they were playing against second teamers and, you know, later, second, third, fourth teamers, because that is actually true, right? And look, you know, like I said, I have gone back and I've watched it multiple times. They still did have some struggles on that offensive line. And definitely things that they needed to clean up. Now, it was a very impressive and encouraging performance overall. But, you know, it's the fact that they were going up against second and third teamers, etc., is part of why, you know, and again, as I had mentioned before, I need to see it again, and I need to see it in the regular season. Look, this Patriots team that we play the first week of the season, it's not going to be an easy game. Okay, they have a good defense, a really good defense. They've got, you know, good corners with J.C. Jackson, and Gilmore's going to be there, right? They have an imposing defensive front. They have a good offensive line. They're going to have a good run game. Their questions are going to be quarterback, which I believe actually Mac Jones is going to be the one that starts the season. And I've actually thought that for, you know, I don't know, probably a good week and a half, maybe 2 weeks now. Maybe since their first preseason game. I think it was since their first preseason game. But anyway, I think Mac Jones, but regardless of who starts, it's going to be a run-heavy team. And I still at this point do think that they are going to win. Overall, I think it's going to, and obviously we have to go play in Gillette, you know, whatever. That's a tough place to play. The stadium is going to be packed. It's going to be loud. But ultimately, I think that the highest probability outcome is that the game ends up being relatively defensive heavy, right? Not a lot of sparks on offense for either team, but it's going to come down to which team can be a little bit more efficient than the other when it comes to offense. Now, my concerns are not about Tua. Again, it's the rest of the offensive line. Obviously, Will Fuller's not going to be there for the first game, and the rest of the wide receivers have a lengthy history of being injured, and are just, you know, barely starting to come off their injuries and start practicing again, right? So, like, in the running back room, if it doesn't have a great offensive line, then it could have its struggles. So, in the running game, right? So it's not really Tua, it's the stuff around it, right? So let me make that clear. And that's why I have to wait before, look, they impressed me enough in the preseason to get them up to 9 wins, okay? But I can't give them more than that, and it could even go back. It just depends on their performance and how they handle things when they actually get into the regular season and when it means stuff. So anyway, let me continue on though. But that's because of everything he's shown since the start of camp, obviously talking about Tua, and not because he lit up the Atlanta defense Saturday night, because quite frankly, that was a group of Falcons backups he was facing, a group that clearly didn't game plan very much to defend what the Dolphins do best. So those are actually really important contextual pieces of data when you evaluate the performance of the Dolphins. It doesn't take away from the fact that they were really impressive and showed a lot of progress. But, you know, it might not have been so good, let's keep it real, if they actually had played all of their starters on both sides of the ball, right? Because, you know, and I had said prior to this, during the week of joint practices, the couple joint practices, I had said in my videos, look, I expect Matt Ryan to play the Dolphins' first team defense a lot better than Andy Dalton did with the Chicago Bears, right? So, because he's just a far better quarterback, in my opinion. So, but he didn't play, right? Nor did 19 or I guess 18 of the other starters, and a total of 24 players because they were sat. So it is important contextual information when if you want to have a fully objective analysis, right? Sports Illustrated National NFL reporter Albert Breer discussed Tagovailoa's progress in his Monday morning quarterback column, and it's difficult to find anything not on the mark about it. While we're on the second-year quarterbacks, I really like what I saw from Tua Tagovailoa on Saturday, and that's after last year made me a skeptic of his. Let's see. The reason, in 2020, I thought the rockiness of his adjustment to the NFL without the talent around him that he had at Bama was glaring. Now, he looked small. Obviously, well, first of all, he is slightly undersized as a quarterback as far as the prototypical measurements, but he wasn't healthy last year. That is an important piece of contextual data for evaluating his performance last year, right? Let's see. His arm ordinary. I mean, at the end of the day, I think there's two things. One, Tua's never had, an elite arm. Is he ever going to have an elite arm? No. Does that matter necessarily? No, right? You can also make it work. He has other elite traits that, are more than good enough, and the elite arm strength doesn't have to be there, right? You don't have to be elite in absolutely every category. He's great with his accuracy. He's pretty damn good with his anticipation, his footwork, his pocket presence. He's a really smart guy. He could read defenses. He could be quick with his reads, right? So you don't necessarily have to. Now, I've mentioned that is one area where you do see some struggles sometimes is when he's pushing it downfield. Look, in the Chicago game, that Mike Gesicki catch, the 50-yarder, it was a great throw and catch, but the fact of the matter is, if we're being completely objective, it was a little bit behind Gesicki. Right? Gesicki had to slow up and come back to the ball a little bit. And if he didn't, if Tua was able to push it further down the field, he would have caught him in stride and it would have been for a touchdown. Now, is that shitting on Tua? No. It's just, and that's theoretically something that could be worked out, whatever. But he has shown some issues consistently in that area, right? Now, but again, that doesn't necessarily matter as long as the rest of the team is built properly, because if he has an offensive line and a run game and weapons on the outside that can score from multiple levels of a defense, right? Whatever, whether it be like a bubble screen behind the line that can go the distance, or a 5 to 10 yard pass that can go the distance, or something past 10 yards, right? Like, there are multiple ways. So as long as those things are in place, he won't have a problem, right? So let's see. His athleticism seemed borderline. And look, again, he was never, Lamar Jackson or even Josh Allen athletic, right? Although I will say he does look better even than his time at Alabama, because I do think he is, he has put in the work and he does look stronger, and so on and so forth. So obviously the health is a huge thing, but he's never been, an elite athlete when it comes to athleticism. But I would still say that he's above average and he has good athleticism, and he certainly can use his legs. But that's obviously also not, the prominent part of his game, right? It never has been. He tends to just use his legs when he needs to, which is fine. And maybe, just maybe, it was a matter of having an offense built for him, or at least that was the hope I thought you could take away from how he played in going 16 of 23 for 183 yards and a touchdown and a half against the Falcons. What I saw was Tagovailoa is playing the kind of instinctive, explosive game that was his calling card at Alabama, right? And again, that comes back to him being healthy, because even in this Falcons game, there were a number of times where he had to manipulate the pocket because it collapsed around him, right? So, anyway, and it felt to me that was coordinators George Gotzi and Eric Studesville working to get the ball out of his hands quicker and play off more RPO and play action looks, the kinds he thrived on in the SEC. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it'll translate cleanly into the regular season. The Falcons sat 23 players on Saturday night. 23 players. So the Dolphins' first offense was doing this against a lot of bubble players for Atlanta. And, of course, the Falcons weren't game planning for Tagovailoa and picking at his weaknesses. practices. So week 1 against the Patriots will be a much better gauge of where he is. But at least on Saturday, I thought Tua looked more like Alabama Tua than at any other point previous, which is good. Absolutely, and I completely agree with that. Speaking of Gotze, he joined the other Dolphins coaches and speaking to the media Monday, and during the course, he said 3 times what he has seen is the biggest improvement from him, which is communication. I'd say the biggest thing that we've noticed is the communication from quarterback to each position group. Gotze said, we think that there's got to be very fluid conversations within our unit. Offensive line, quarterback, tight end, quarterback, receiver, and backs. We utilize the backs a bunch of different ways along with the tight ends. He's made strides from that perspective, and it's not easy to do all the time and point out when you're right or when you're wrong, and that's what we ask him to do at the start of camp. And he's done a good job at it, and that's what has enhanced his play efficiency. All right, so I just wanted to add that because it is important context, and I do want people to just, a lot of people, when I point things like that out, a lot of people will take that and be like, oh, you're just being a hater and you're just being negative. No, it's because I want people to have the full context. Look, I came away impressed. They got 2 wins from me on their season total, and it's going to stay there until they prove, otherwise, one way or the other. It can go up if they beat the Patriots in the first game of the season. Then I'll feel confident in calling a 10-win season, right? And then if they beat the Bills after that, then I'll say, hey, look, maybe they could get to 11 wins, and maybe they could even actually win the division after starting 2-0 within the division, right? So, but then again, if they lose those 2 games, then maybe it changes a little bit. I think likely, unless they got absolutely destroyed in both of those games, I'm still going to say, a 9-win season until they prove otherwise, right? So it just depends on what the reality is and what the context is. But I want people to understand that they weren't playing against, first teamers. It was still vanilla playbooks. They weren't game planning or scheming for the Dolphins. It was just a lot of basic shit against bubble players. So we do need to keep ourselves from getting too emotionally invested until the start of the regular season, when we can actually see what the legitimate product is that is being put out there. Now, there's room for optimism and hope and excitement, but just keep yourselves in check until we can actually see what the real product is, and that will happen, come first game of the season, and it's coming up. We're only a few weeks away. And obviously, Brian Flores said today, and we're about to get to what he had to say. He did say today that he's not sure if Tua will play against the Bengals. So there is some possibility. But, my guess is that, especially with the roster cut down to 53 coming, just a few days after that, they're probably going to just play the second stringers and so on. I think that there is a legit possibility, though, that the starting offensive line plays, because they really could use some more work. But we'll see. I actually don't expect there to be much of the starters, if any at all. But who knows, man, because they do have 2 weeks until the start of the regular season. And so maybe Brian Flores feels like that's enough time for them to rest and stuff. Perhaps. There was that comment he made during the game against the Falcons where he said, we're not going to coach scared, we're not going to play scared, and we're going to play our guys. And that came after, Waddle went back in the game after having that injury scare. All right, anyway, let's get on to what Brian Flores did have to say from his press conference today. Today is another day of roster cuts, with teams needing to get down to 80 players. Flores said the cuts will come after practice, which they did, and we will get into. With the injured wide receivers, Flores says they will be out there today, though it should be noted that the Dolphins are conducting a walkthrough. So in other words, and that's part of the good news, though, is that Will Fuller was actually out there. Devontae Parker was out there, although I think he had a red non-contact jersey on, which doesn't really matter if you're just doing a walkthrough, but, whatever. Albert Wilson was out there, so it was good, even though it was just a walkthrough and they didn't actually do anything, right? it's just a walkthrough. You're just acting it out. You're pretending, right? You're not actually like hitting each other or really throwing the ball or really doing much of anything, right? So anyway, Flores says they're getting closer to the question as to whether they would be practicing today if it was a regular practice. Jalen Waddle will be at the walkthrough as well after missing a couple plays against Atlanta. Rookie tight end Hunter Long worked hard to get back. Tough kid, hardworking kid. Flores says Long needs reps. Expect him to see action against Cincinnati. Me saying this, not Flores. No decision yet has been made on whether Tua will play against the Bengals in the preseason finale. The IR rules are the same as last year, with an unlimited number of players eligible to return after 3 games once they're on the initial 53-man. Flores says he doesn't know how much that applies right now, I think is what he meant to say, pointing out that keeping a player on the roster to then put him on IR after the cuts to 53 forces the team to expose another player to the waiver wire. Yeah, it's tricky. Preston Williams and Landon, which, wait till we get to the cuts though, it's going to be interesting. I think that the areas that they decided to target in their first series of cuts is a little strange to me, but we'll get to that in a second. Preston Williams and Elandon Roberts came off PUP last week, and Flores says the hope is to ramp them up as quickly as possible. The Dolphins have a surplus of wide receivers, and Flores says the competition for roster spots is still playing out. There will be a bye after the end of the preseason, and Flores says there have been conversations about the make use of those extra days. Flores indicates that players will not be at the facility for 3 days during Labor Day weekend. Selflessness is a trait that's important in this game, Flores said, adding he learned that from his high school coach. Flores says the Dolphins have a lot of good guys from that standpoint. Okay. Asked about Solomon Kinley and Liam Eichenberg, Flores says they're both competing for the opportunity to play a lot. Well, alrighty then. I do want to add in some other, some other notes that he gave, and then I might take some also off the Bleacher Report timeline. But let's see, cornerback Xavier Howard was out. He is sick today, although not COVID related, and will not take part in the Dolphins walkthrough. Let's see, Dolphins practice report. Don't forget it's a walkthrough. Missing was Jordan Scarlett, Brennan Scarlett, Jakeem Grant, Bowden, Foster, Holland. Now, there's a couple of these guys are not there for a reason, but we'll get to that. Back was Brandon Jones, Parker in a red jersey, and Fuller. Working on the bike was Wilson, Ford, Pankey, Beagle, Carter, and Javaris Davis. Jakeem Grant has been spotted, but he's working on the bike. Another update, Javon Holland spotted, working on the bike. Another update, as players keep showing up, Brennan Scarlett is present but not working, and he's wearing a compression sleeve on his right leg. So Brennan Scarlett is the linebacker. Jordan Scarlett is the running back. Albert Wilson, who had been riding the stationary bike during position drills, is taking part in the walkthrough. First team offensive line remains from left to right: Jackson, Kinley, Dieter, Hunt, and Davis. And that is actually what started against the Falcons, although Liam Eichenberg did come in not too long after that. Let's see. Okay, and then he, among others, he retweeted. And so this is the roster moves. They have gotten rid of offensive lineman Jermaine Illuminor, wide receiver Isaiah Ford, waived injured Robert Foster, and placed Lynn Bowden Jr. on injured reserve. So this is interesting for a couple reasons. One, because it clears up the wide receiver position a little bit. But the reason why I find they're prioritizing interesting in these first round of cuts, because if you remember, the first round of cuts that they did was included 3 offensive linemen: Jonathan Hubbard, Timon Paris, who are both tackles, and Tyler Mars, who is a guard. This obviously included a couple wide receivers. Lynn Bowden Jr. obviously has a hamstring injury and is expected to be out for at least probably a few weeks. And I just read you the COVID IR rules, or the IR rules since COVID. So, he will be able to be activated soon. Although, actually, I'm not sure about that because he was placed on the injured reserve now, which means he's not going to be on the active 53-man roster. He can't be because he won't be eligible. So he's actually not going to fall under those IR rules, I believe, because since he was put on IR now, that means he's not going to be on the 53-man roster to start the season. And then, because that's one of the requirements to be able to come off of IR after 3 weeks. The unlimited players from bringing back unlimited players from IR, that still applies to him though, I think. So when he is eligible, which I believe it would go to normal IR rules, which I think means he'll be eligible like halfway through the season to come back from IR, if I'm not mistaken. But he should be anyway. But that does clear up because Lynn Bowden's obviously not going to be one of the guys on the roster to start the season. It's not going to be Robert Foster. It's not going to be Isaiah Ford. So we are clearing up the picture, and they got rid of Jermaine Illuminor, another offensive lineman. So I find it funny because offensive line is still even with their impressive performance this past week, it is still the weakest unit on the roster. And it's where they decided to make cuts first. To me, that would be the last place that you make cuts because you want to have as much competition in that room as long as possible to find the best 5 players. But hey, they apparently disagree, and they're getting rid of their backup depth offensive linemen first and wide receivers first, when that's yes, we have a ton of wide receivers on the roster, but all of our top wide receivers are very injury prone. So that's also an area where you would want to have the most competition for the longest period of time. So that's why, to me, it's a little weird that those are the moves that they decide to do, right off the bat. So, but yeah, so anyway, and also let me point out though too that there is a possibility that, especially with him being placed on injured reserve now, that Bowden actually could be out for the entire season. Although I don't think that's going to be the case because it's a hamstring injury, and he should at the very least be able to come back like mid-season. If it's the old school IR rules that apply to him as far as when he can come back, which I think is the case, it would be like somewhere in mid-season. But anyway, so other than that though, actually there's really not much else to say. Like I said, it was just a walkthrough, but we did have Albert Wilson and Fuller and Parker out there. We got rid of another offensive lineman and a few wide receivers. Bowden was put on IR. We cut Isaiah Ford and Robert Foster, so that clears up that picture a little bit. But yeah, so honestly, I mean, that is really about it. The big things now are just we have to get through the rest of this week of practice. It's only Tuesday right now. Let me see. I'm going to pull up really fast because I'm not sure. Okay. So our next game actually isn't until Sunday. So it's going to be a Sunday game. So we have to wait until Sunday this week before we see the Dolphins play. And like I said, I mean, my expectation for the final game against the Bengals is that it's going to be mostly just second teamers and whatever. We may see the starting offensive line, but that's as far as starters go, that's about as far as my expectation goes, if I'm keeping it real. But you never know, and Brian Flores may decide he wants to put them out there for a little bit, so it is certainly possible. But it would seem that the Falcons game was the dress rehearsal, which For the Falcons, it was not their dress rehearsal. They're apparently going to use their final game of the preseason as their dress rehearsal. It would seem so because they didn't play like any of their starters against us, right? So, you know, and teams are doing it differently. A lot, you know, every team is doing it, you know, their way. Some teams decided to do the second game. Some teams are deciding to do the third game. Some teams, I think, even are deciding to just sit their starters the entire way. So, you know, there's different ways of doing it, and we're seeing how it plays out. But yeah, so, you know, obviously, though, this next game is going to be important, I think, primarily also because, you know, I think that even if the starters do go out, they're not going to be out there for very long, just because this, you know, coaching staff or whatever, they do need to get a good look at the rest of those players, because they are going to have to, the following Tuesday, just a couple days later, right, 2 days later, they are going to have to trim the roster down to 53. Now, the practice squad can get up to 16 players, but, you know, in the case of like some of those wide receivers and really any player on the roster, once they get cut, they do get exposed to waivers, as Flores mentioned in his press conference, right? So, it is going to be really interesting. And honestly, for me going into this next game, I would, you know, a part of me would like to see the starters for a little bit, but if I'm keeping it real, I think it actually does make the most sense to sit them, let them rest, keep them from having any potential injuries, and also get a good look at those back roster guys, because it is going to be really fascinating to see how the final 53-man roster does end up playing out. When it shakes out and ends up at that final number. So, and honestly, that's going to be the big thing that I take away from this week overall is what ends up happening after this upcoming game with the roster cuts, right? So, anyway, with that, I'm going to get out of here. I hope you guys appreciate my perspective. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button, make sure you hit the like button, make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Share my channel and videos with your friends and family. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comments section. Of course, as always, follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I am out. I'll see y'all soon. Fins up.